Hi, everyone. My name is Elijah Drenner, here for Vinegar Syndrome, and today I'm joined with Adam Rifkin, a.k.a. Riff Coogan, to discuss all things The Invisible Maniac. Adam, welcome, and thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's just jump in. Tell me the genesis of The Invisible Maniac.
Well, when I was 20, I had made my first film. It was called Never on Tuesday. And upon completing it, I reached out to a filmmaker who I was a huge fan of named John Landis, who had directed Animal House, Blues Brothers, American Werewolf in London, so many other classics. And I just had always loved his movies, and he inspired me when I was young. And so I wanted to show him my first film, and he couldn't have been nicer. And he invited me to the Universal lot, and he screened my film, and he took me to lunch, and he was very, very magnanimous with his time and his advice. And he's subsequently become a mentor and a great friend. But one of the things that I remember him saying in those early days very vividly, he said, you know, when you're a director, you get very few opportunities to practice. You're just thrown in. You know, somehow your movie, the planets align, your movie gets funded, and then it's all systems go, and you just have to jump in. And he said if there was a way to practice more, it could only be a benefit. So I remembered that. So anyway, the first script I ever wrote was called The Dark Backward, and I was trying desperately to get that made. And that movie was finally starting to come together, and that movie meant a lot to me. And the words of John Landis echoed in my mind that, you know, directors could benefit from practice. So I thought to myself, as The Dark Backward was slowly coming together and starting to prep, I thought, well, if I could do a tiny little grindhouse movie right before The Dark Backward, just to get a little more practice in behind the camera, I think it would benefit my performance as a filmmaker on The Dark Backward, because I really wanted The Dark Backward to be as great as it could be. So one of the producers of Never on Tuesday and The Dark Backward was named Cassian Elwes, and he also was cranking out tons of exploitation straight-to-video movies during that time. And I said to him, you know, while The Dark Backward's, you know, marching toward a start date, I want to do one of these little tiny movies and just flex my muscles a little bit. So I came up with this idea for The Invisible Maniac, and he thought it was great, and he told the idea to the guy who was funding a lot of these movies for him, a guy named Merton Shapiro, who looked very much like what you'd expect a Merton Shapiro to look like. And so we decided we would do this movie. So The Dark Backward was kind of, I wouldn't say in full prep, but it was in preliminary prep while we made The Invisible Maniac.
I see. And it's interesting that you bring up John Landis, because this whole opening sequence here reminds me very much of Animal House.
Of course, how could it not? I mean, you know, these things influence you. You know, they seep into your work, the influences that you grew up with. You know.
Well, John, and you're from Chicago.
I am.
And so John Landis was from Chicago originally.
Well,
too, wasn't
he's
he?
from New York and grew up in L.A.
But I thought there was like a Chicago connection, because a lot of his movies, I mean, obviously Blues Brothers, but
his Chicago connection, I can't speak for him, but I believe the Chicago connection is the blues and the music and the movies and stuff like that.
Okay.
I don't think, you know, but his presence in Chicago loomed large when I was there. When I was a kid, they were shooting the Blues Brothers, and it was an event in the city. So that was fun.
Well, John really is a very gregarious, supportive filmmaker. And when people reach out to him, he gives you 100%.
Absolutely true. And he gave me 100% always when I was starting out. I mean, just great advice. He would call people on my behalf if I needed a call from a heavyweight. I mean, he was just always very generous.
And this young boy who's playing Dornwinkle as a young child is sort of the what I always refer to as the Rifkinian dweeb. This sort of reoccurring character that happens in a lot of your movies. I mean, you see Miles in Psycho Cop Returns. You see your character in Chillerama. You even see like Penn Jillette in Director's Cut. This nebbish nerd who gets revenge in some way. Have you ever thought about that? Am I reaching too hard?
I wouldn't say that I thought about it consciously, but it certainly is another example of my influences. You know, I mean, I was very influenced by Woody Allen growing up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was the unlucky nebbish, you know, who would find himself in embarrassing situations. I mean, and so many other movies, you know. I mean, I just related to that character for whatever reason, I guess you could say. I mean, I wear glasses. I'm a bit of a, you know, I was never the football hero growing up. So, I think this is a character that I related to in films, and it just reflected in the movies that I then would go on to make. And it's an archetype that's also, I mean, just to be totally candid, it's an archetype that's easy to immediately grasp when you're watching a movie, you know?
You don't have to explain a lot about the character.
Don't. And so because of that, there's a shorthand between the filmmaker and the audience that helps get things rolling quicker, you know?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I also think a lot about, you know, Robert Crumb or Mad Magazine.
And
you know,
all those are huge influences on me, too.
Because you were also an artist.
Yeah, cartoonist, I would say, more
Yes.
than an artist. But yeah, I always have been into cartooning and always into Mad Magazine and comic book kind of stuff, horror comics and you know, all that kind of stuff,
And
wacky packages.
This falls right into that category
Absolutely.
as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
Well, here we are. And do you know where this location is?
Everything was shot at the same location, which was a school in Los Angeles on Laurel Canyon Boulevard at Ventura.
Okay.
And it's changed hands a number of times throughout the years. At this time, it was abandoned. It was, well, not abandoned. It was just empty at this time. But it's been different schools throughout the years. And for this brief window, it was available, it was empty, and we were able to use it. So the school, it had a school, it had dorm rooms, it had this chapel area, it had everything we needed. That's my grandfather, Harold Sokol, the great Harold Sokol, deli owner from Chicago, big influence on my whole life. Also, I want to point out that my mother is in this scene, my grandmother is in this scene, my then girlfriend at the time, Valerie Brayman, who is still one of my closest friends, is in this scene, all playing scientists. Tony Marks, one of the other producers of the film, his mother is in this scene. Matt Devlin, the other producer, his mother is in this scene. So this scene was a family affair.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, too. You bring up, you know...
That's Tony Marks' mother.
Okay.
Theories of molecular reorganization in the journals.
And they have a lot of gobbledygook to speak. I mean, did they deliver their lines pretty easily?
Everybody was pretty good at it, except for the doctor from Belgium. He kept messing up his line. But everybody else throughout the movie, and especially Noel Peters, who is playing the Invisible Maniac himself, his ability to memorize science nonsense was awe-inspiring.
Now, you mentioned Tony and Mark, right? The other producer, Mark Devlin, is that?
Matt Devlin.
Matt Devlin.
That's my mother right there, and that's
it is.
Valerie over her right shoulder.
Completely.
They wrote the script, or did you write the script?
I wrote the script. They did a rewrite on it see, the thing is, while the movie was prepping, I was also prepping The Dark Backward.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the prep for this movie, I wasn't present for some of it.
I see.
So they did the production polish while I was prepping The Dark Backward. Are they credited on the script? I don't know if I think they are.
I think that they are. I think in some way, online somewhere, it says that their names are on
It might say
there.
it on IMDb. I don't think it says it on the movie, though. Did it? I missed it.
We
I'll
were
have to
talking.
go back and look. But they did a production polish on it, but I wrote the original script. And they kind of did a lot of the prep. That's my grandmother. They did a lot of the prep of the movie while I was, that's a stuntman. They did a lot of the prep while I was on The Dark Backward. So, generally speaking, to me, this whole movie was just, as I was mentioning, a chance to just get some practice in on set, you know? So, nobody on this movie believed we were making a good movie. Nobody, right? It was just fun. The stakes were low. We had no time. We had no money. I mean, we shot the movie in about a week. We had about 100, maybe 150 grand to make the whole movie. And anytime things went wrong, anytime something looked shitty or cheap, we just thought it was funny. We didn't take it super seriously. And I have to say, as a result, it made it so much fun to make because the pressure was low.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to On the Dark Backward, which I was so consumed with wanting to make sure that it was as good as it could possibly be. It was much more stressful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, don't get me wrong, making every movie is fun, and even when everything goes wrong, it's more fun than when everything goes wrong when you're not making a movie, you know? But this movie just provided me with a great opportunity to play on set. And there was one point in time on the movie, I had just recently, prior to shooting this, I had just watched Hearts of Darkness, the making of movie about Apocalypse Now.
Mm-hmm.
And something struck me while I was on set of this movie. I was looking at the cameras, and I remembered the exact moment in the documentary where the helicopters come in and the crew catches Vittorio Storaro saying to Coppola, the copters came in a little too high. We might want to do it again. Have them come in a little bit lower this time. And I'm thinking to myself, they have the same cameras we had on this movie. They had all the same components, film, a crew to help make things move more smoothly. But, you know, they made a brilliant classic, and we were making a piece of, you know, exploitation nonsense. But I realized it's just all, you know, the tools are the same, no matter what movie you're making. And what's different is how seriously you take it, how talented the people are who are making it. It was a very educational moment for me. I thought to myself, you know, you can make a movie great no matter what the budget, no matter what the schedule, if you have really good people, you know, working within whatever limitations you have to make it the best it can possibly be. Now, none of us were making this the best it could possibly be. we were just cranking out product, quote unquote. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, that product, quote unquote, is the direct-to-video market. And this was a big, I mean, people talk about it, when people listening to this, they know about it, but like this was a real huge market.
Huge. It was a huge market, and it was completely, it was a huge part of what, this is all part of the campus. Everything here is part of the campus of that school. It was a huge, I guess it had been a Christian school at one time. That's why they had the chapel and,
I see.
and everything, and the quarters for the clergy people to live. Everything we needed was there.
I'll say that Noel Peters really reminds me of Henry Hull from the Werewolf of London in this sequence.
Oh, totally.
I mean, he uses his body just when he like comes into the frame. He even bears a resemblance to him just as an actor,
a little
too,
bit,
which I really appreciate watching this movie.
Well, when we were screening the answer print at the lab at Photochem, right when we had finished it, I needed to go and sort of approve it. And I was with a buddy of mine, and we went, and I said, hey, do you want to come and watch it with me? He said, sure. So while we were watching that very scene where he's running, where he does his escape and he's looking back and forth, and I said, he's a very committed performance, which was very true. He was completely committed to making this performance the great performance of all time. And it shows. He does a great job.
He really does. And how did you find him?
Well, Tony Marks, who's one of the producers of this, was the casting director of The Dark Backward. So before we had Bill Paxton for the role of Gus, we were auditioning people. You know, we wanted Bill Paxton, but we didn't know if we were going to get him. So we were auditioning people, and Noel Peters came in and auditioned for the role of Gus and was so funny and was so, you know, he was so big and larger than life, we just thought, you know, this guy's great. So when we decided to make Invisible Maniac real quick, you know, crank it out, have some fun, we remembered him. And so it was this role was kind of written for him in a way, you know.
Okay. I mean, you didn't offer it? I mean, you just did you make him audition again?
For
or
this?
Was it?
No, we just offered.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And here we have Stephanie Blake.
Stephanie Blake, who is a successful actress and burlesque performer.
Yes, that's right. And we're looking at a bunch of old teenagers, really.
Again, we didn't care. We thought that was funny, you know?
Well, it was par for the course in those days. You know, this is 90210 era, I suppose,
exactly.
or close to. So, yeah, tell me a little bit about, well, there's Bubba, right? And there's Deborah Lamb in the back.
By the way, Bubba, Eric Campanella, he's gone on to become a very successful screenwriter.
Yes,
and
I
director.
saw that. Yeah, that's great.
He's very successful. Stephanie Blake, Miss Cello, played Miss Cello. She was great to work. Everybody was great to work with. That's the thing on this movie. Everybody was just in it to have fun, and everybody knew the assignment going in, And even though Noel, gave it his all, so did Vincent Price when he made, some of those horrible movies he made back in the 60s and 70s, But,
Sure.
but that's one of the things that I love about guys like Vincent Price and Boris Karloff and all those guys who were doing those Roger Corman movies at the sort of twilight years of their career. They never walked through a movie. Never. They always gave it their all. And that's what I appreciated about Noel Peters and everybody on this movie. Nobody walked through it, even though everybody knew, and we joked about it the whole movie, that what we were doing was silly and it was not going to be great, and it was good, but everybody showed up, and that was fabulous.
They all have conviction, and
Everybody did.
because of that, you can watch the movie a lot easier because everyone is there, as you said, especially Noel.
Absolutely. Now, Shannon Wilsey, who is in the foreground here, this beautiful blonde girl, she went on to become Savannah, who was the most famous porn star in all of the 90s.
Yes.
But this was her first film.
It was her first film because there's some information online that shows a different pseudonym where she was making adult films, but couldn't have been because she was too young.
That is inaccurate. This was her very first film, and she was so sweet and so funny, just naturally funny. She didn't even try to be funny. She just had that sort of Marilyn Monroe funny quality about her, and she was great. Everybody was great. I mean, Melissa Moore was great. Is still great. I've been back in touch with a few of the people who worked on the movie because of this Blu-ray release, and reconnected with some and talked about the upcoming
interviews,
release and interviews and stuff. And everybody has a really, really positive memory about making this movie, which is fun.
And this gentleman here was also in Dark Backward.
Yes, Jason Logan, we met on this movie. He was, again, fully committed, which was fabulous. We loved. And so I thought he had such a great face that I used him in The Dark Backward, which we then ended up shooting very soon after this.
Now, what's the name of the school here? Is JKF, is that just supposed to be a joke for, it looks like jack off to me.
We didn't make those costumes, we just rented them. So whatever was already on the sweater, we just went with.
Because that's what makes, maybe that just says something about me, but it looks like it's a euphemism for jack off.
I like the way you think. You've come to the right movie. Now, I will say this. This is something, speaking of the straight-to-video
market
era, the halcyon days of straight-to-video exploitation, grindhouse movies. You look back on all these movies now, and they're filled with nudity, gratuitous nudity, and gratuitous violence, right? Now, that's not just because everybody in those days happened to be a pervert. Well, maybe to some degree that's true, but that was a prerequisite for sales. It was you could not sell your movie to the foreign territories, which is where most of the money was made for movies like this in the various foreign territories. They were unsellable if you didn't meet some sort of nudity and violence quotient,
Right.
So that's why every movie in this time period of this straight-to-video era, that's why they're all filled with it. You look back on it now, and it all seems a little skeezy,
Well, but it was, and you think about the red curtain at the video store. That's where all the dirty movies were, and every kid knew that.
Yes.
And what could you get your parents to rent for you that looked harmless, but would have what could be some version of what's behind that red curtain?
It's true.
And that would be The Invisible Maniac.
True.
This was one of those movies where it's a very harmless, almost Disney-like cover.
Right. Right. It's true.
But we all knew when we were kids that this movie was pervy.
It's true. But by the way, the studios were doing the same thing with, speaking of John Landis, with Animal House.
Absolutely.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Porky's. It's hard to put oneself back in those days, but consider that pre-internet, right? Libidinous teenage boys, which was the market, let's be honest, couldn't just click on a mouse if they wanted to see a set of breasts.
Right.
You know, he either had to rent a movie like this, or you had to somehow sneak into or get somebody to take you to see Animal House, or you would steal a dirty magazine from behind the counter of a convenience store. But there was no other way, and so these movies fulfilled a certain need, I guess you could say.
Right. And unapologetically.
It's without question. And so my feeling was, if I'm going to make an exploitation movie, we decided this going in. If we're going to make an exploitation movie, let's make an exploitation movie. Let's bring it.
Right.
So we did not want to shy away from why people would want to rent a movie like this.
Right. And Melissa Moore here, she was a very busy actor during this time, making a lot of these movies.
Oh, she was
She's
in a
in
ton
some
of
of those witchcraft movies as well. So, it's you begin to notice a lot of those faces, familiar faces, when you watch these movies. But I don't know if anyone really took them, really wrote down some of these names. I guess there was a magazine like Femme Fatales. I mean, that
and
magazine.
there was also the magazine called Scream Queens.
Yeah. So there was a market. These actresses really did have.
It's true, and also too, they became famous in magazines like Fangoria and stuff like that as well. But yes, it was a thing. To be a Scream Queen was a style of success.
Right, and they could market themselves that way.
Absolutely.
And here you have like this amazing scene. This idea of turning on the radio to dance in the shower. I mean, that's inspired. Why did it take cinema so long to figure out that's all you need is just a radio in the shower?
It's embarrassing now when I look back on it, but
that's of all the embarrassing things, that's the one you're embarrassed about.
one in a series of embarrassing things.
And this is this very strategically placed vent. When you were trying to find this location, did you look for a vent, or was that just there? Was it in the script?
It was definitely in the script. I don't remember if it was in the script as a vent or as a hole.
Right.
A la Porky's.
Right.
Know. But the thing is, when you're making any movie, there's a to some degree you adapt to what you have available to you, especially if you're making an independent film. So this gym had this vent. So now what they're looking at in reality is not into the shower. We built that shower was a set, actually.
Oh, it was?
It was just a 2-wall set.
Okay.
That we pumped water in. That was we had warm water pumped in.
Okay.
That was
that at the school as well, or was
at the school? That was
at
the
school.
school.
Was.
And it was it's the one. I think it's like the one set we built.
Okay.
I don't think we really built anything else for this movie. Everything else was what we could find is what we used.
Okay. I mean, his whole body language is really admirable.
I love his performance in this. We were planning to make a sequel.
Really?
That never ultimately materialized, unfortunately. But it was going to be called I Was a Teenage Invisible Maniac, and Miles Dougal was going to be Noel Peters' son. And for whatever reason, it never happened.
Well, there's still time.
It's never too late. You're absolutely right. It's never too late.
So you've got a low budget. You shoot for a week. Like, what's the ratio of are you just doing one take? I mean, Stephanie kind of slightly flubs a line here in this scene if you go back and watch it again. And I just wonder, are you doing multiple takes, or are you just doing a one take and then moving on?
We did multiple takes very infrequently. It was truly the Roger Corman style of shoot and run, you know? I mean, his line was, unless the camera falls over, you don't get another take.
Right.
We didn't quite take it to that extreme. But we also thought it was, like I said, we just thought it was funny if somebody flubbed the line. Because ultimately, and I don't want this to sound disrespectful to everybody involved, because everybody worked hard, including myself. We all did our best within the parameters of understanding that we knew we were making a piece of shit. You know, so but that has to word it that way has a pejorative spin on it. We were making a piece of shit lovingly. We love pieces of shit. We love exploitation movies. We love horror movies. We love grindhouse movies. So knowing it was a piece of shit was not something that we were ashamed of. We just thought it was funnier that way, you know?
Right. The shackles were off.
The shackles were off.
No pretensions. Just
Exactly.
make it.
It's a perfect way to put it. I don't remember where this rabbit came from, but I am and I have always been a avid animal lover. So
Yes.
I just want to make it clear the rabbit was not harmed in any way during the making of this film.
Did you have the Humane Society on set?
We did not. But I was a little bit of my own Humane Society because I am such an animal freak. So I made sure the animal was treated very, very kindly.
Now, so was this like a union picture?
No, it was not. It was not. I don't think we were involved in any unions at the time. I was not at that time in the Writers Guild or the Directors Guild. I don't think any of the actors were in the Screen Actors Guild, or if they were in it anyway.
Under pseudonyms?
Under pseudonyms. We were not IATSE. We were not union at all.
Okay.
But we were pretty under the radar. I mean, once we parked our one truck, if we even had one, I don't even remember, at this location, we were just there the whole movie. So we were on private property the whole time.
I see. And were you doing Tony and Mark did the preparation for you, but you obviously did some of your own prep day to day. It's like, what was that prep?
Well, like with any movie, I do my preliminary prep before, just in my mind. I know in my mind, and I make shot lists of how I imagine shooting a scene or what shots I need to be able to convey what I want to convey, whether I want it to be scary or funny, or whether I want it to just be basic coverage, or do I want a lot of gravy shots, or whatever it is. I put those things down to paper before we start, and then the night before, you familiarize yourself with the scenes the next day. When you get to the set, you block things out very roughly, with the actors and the cameraman, how you're going to shoot it. Now, one thing that we did, for example, to save time, is and this is called block shooting. I didn't know it was called block shooting at that time. We just did it because it seemed like it was going to be a really effective way to shoot as quickly as possible. I subsequently learned there's a name for this. It's called block shooting, where every scene in the classroom, for example, we would light the classroom, let's say facing the blackboard, right? So we'd have all the lights at the back of the room facing the blackboard. We'd have the cameras at the back of the room facing the blackboard, and we would go through every scene in the movie in the classroom from that camera position, right? Then we would change the lighting to the front of the classroom looking back, and put the cameras in the front of the classroom looking back, and then we would go and shoot every scene in the classroom throughout the whole movie from that direction. And the only thing that changes from scene to scene is the actors would run and change their clothes and come back. And then, there's little shots that we would, of course, pay specific attention to that were important. But we would do that throughout the whole movie. So, because a lot of times when you have the time and you have the money, you can shoot a whole scene out, all directions, and then you go to the next scene and you shoot all scenes out all directions. You can change your lighting back and forth and back and forth. And there's a lot of good reasons why that works, as far as making sure you have a continuity of performance, and it helps the actors stay focused on, just one scene. But we didn't care about that stuff on this movie. We just needed to get it done. And that, to me, was the challenge. And in fact, that may be probably a better way to word this as I'm thinking out loud. So, to me, this movie was a challenge. Can I shoot everything that needs to be shot, shoot it as well as possible, have it convey what I want it to convey, all within this very, very tight schedule? And that challenge, I felt, was going to be very educational for me going into The Dark Backward, where I had a little more time and a little more money, of course, but still, it was an independent movie, and it was still a tight schedule, but we had a lot of movie stars in that movie, and I wanted to make sure I was as on top of my game as I could possibly be for being that age and having that limited of an amount of experience,
How old were you when you made this movie?
I was 22 when I made this. I was 23 when I made The Dark Backward.
Wow. That's a big deal.
I didn't know it at the time. I look back now as a wizened old 55-year-old man. I think, wow, that is kind of a big deal. I'm impressed with my young self. But at the time, I didn't even think about it. You just do it.
Right.
You just don't even think. You just go.
Right. And how did you? I mean, you came out here from Chicago. You were how old? You were.
I came out at 17. All I ever wanted to do was make movies. That's all I ever wanted to do. I grew up making movies with my friends with my dad's Super 8 camera. And I always knew that when the day came, when I was old enough, I would move out here and I'd pursue making movies for real, and I'd learn how to make movies the real way. But all the movies I made as a kid, I didn't understand it at the time because I was just doing it because I loved it. But I was actually teaching myself the basics, the basic principles of how to make a movie. Mm-hmm. I taught myself, because you watch movies and you see how they're made, and so I learned what coverage was, and I learned how to edit, and I learned, because originally I would do these movies and I would do in-camera editing. Mm-hmm. I'd cut the camera and then change the angle and cut, and I didn't know it was done any other way. Then you learn, you can buy a little editing setup, mm-hmm. and you can shoot everything with this actor saying these lines, and then you can shoot everything with this actor saying these lines, and then you can cut it together later, Mm-hmm. Especially when the same actor's playing both roles, which, I had to do that a lot. So I came out here originally to go to USC, film school. Mm-hmm. And a lot of big people were in my class at that time, or at the school at that time. Some of them were older than me, but like Jay Roach was my teacher's assistant in my cinematography class. He went on to make a lot of movies, mm-hmm. including all the Austin Powers movies, as you know. Larry Karaszewski and Scott Alexander were there. They went on to write
Ed Wood,
People versus Larry Flint. I mean, so many great movies. John Singleton was there. Michael Lehman was there. A lot of really great people were there at the time. Anyway, but I kind of felt, after I got there, and I was there for about a year, I kind of felt like, if you go to medical school, you spend all these years working really hard, going to medical school. When you come out the other side, you're a doctor, mm-hmm. right? If you do everything right. You go to law school. You spend all these years going to law school. You study. You work hard. You come out the other side. You are a lawyer. You go to film school. You spend all these years studying film, making short films, going to graduate school, making short films. You come out the other end, you're just a schmuck who wants to be a filmmaker. I thought to myself, well, I'm already a schmuck who wants to be a filmmaker. I'll drop out of school. I'll just start writing scripts, and I'll just start knocking on doors and trying to get money to get them made, because I learned at this tender age, the only magic between making a movie and not making a movie is having the money to make it. Mm-hmm. It never dawned on me that it was that simple when I was growing up in Chicago. But I learned that here. So I thought, well, why don't I just start writing scripts and I'll find money to get them made. So that's a whole other story, trying mm-hmm. to get my first movie made. But the first one I wrote was The Dark Backward. And that was the first one I was trying to get funded. And that script is what led me to meet Brad Wyman, who ended up producing it, with Cassian Elwes. And that's how I met Cassian Elwes as well. They produced The Dark Backward. They first produced Never on Tuesday, then they produced The Dark Backward. But while Cassian was cranking out these movies, that's how this movie came about.
Uh-huh. Wow. Well, I mean, what's interesting, too, when you think back when you were trying to make movies, it was a lot harder because you were shooting on film, right? I mean, that was a big wall that any wannabe filmmaker...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can I just tell you something about
Sure.
this dream scene?
Sure,
okay,
please do.
I just have to tell you this, okay? So there was a day on the set. I don't remember what the situation was, but I had to leave the set for a few hours to do something concerning The Dark Backward. I don't remember what it was. It might have been a meeting with Bill Paxton. It might have been, I don't remember what it was, right? But Matt Devlin, who was one of the producers and who also had directed some Grindhouse movies himself, mm-hmm. had taken over. I said he took over as the director while I was gone for those a couple of hours. This is not in the script. I came back, and he had shot this. By the way, I was thrilled with the footage. We definitely used it in the movie, but this was not. He just took it upon himself to shoot this while I was gone. More power to him.
Yeah. Well, was it intended to be filler? I mean, this is a lean movie. I mean, this is like what, 86 minutes?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know if it was intended to be anything other than that he had cameras and he had the cast, and he just kind of went nuts for a few hours. But I came back, surprised to learn that there's a dream sequence in the movie now.
Well, going back to this firewall of making movies, wanting to make movies.
Yes. So, in answer to what you were saying, absolutely true. So even when you were making the lowest budget movie possible, like, I mean, this is a pretty low budget movie. Listen, there's always examples of people who've made movies for a lower budget, obviously. I mean, Return of the Secaucus 7 is made for nothing, you know. Robert Rodriguez's first movie, we all know, was made for nothing. But still, there are some hard costs. So this movie was shot on 35 millimeter film. You had to buy the film. You had to develop the film. You had to print the film. You had to rent editing equipment to be able to edit the film.
Because this is all on flatbeds, I assume.
All
right?
on flatbeds and moviolas. There were hard costs that could not be avoided. So yes, it was hard to get, because now you could make a movie on your phone. You could shoot a movie on your phone. You could edit it on software that you have for on your laptop. You can release it on YouTube to a worldwide audience, and you can promote it to a worldwide audience on social media. You could basically do all of that for free now, you know? And if you work really hard and you are really talented and everybody is, you know, game to do the best job they can, you can actually make a great movie that way. And it's happened, obviously, countless times. But at this time, you needed certain basic components that cost money. So to make a movie, any movie, you had to somehow raise. I mean, to raise $150,000 when you're 22 years old, you might as well say I need $100 million. You know.
I mean, you're literally knocking on doors. You're literally making phone calls. You're literally making meetings with people, and you're just one of dozens in the day. And those who break seal, success. But it takes a lot of people a real hard time.
But I will say this era, which I miss. And anyone who aspires to be a filmmaker also, you know, have missed out on, is that because the market was so huge, and every little company that was sprouting up out of the woodwork was making so much money off every one of these little pieces of crap movies, they needed so much product that lots of people got opportunities to make movies. Their first movies, you know. Now, we know lots of them are so bad that you have a hard time watching them, you know. But some of them are pretty fun, and some of them are actually pretty good. And a lot of people started this way and have gone on to make great movies and had great careers. So it was an amazing time if you're starting out, because they needed movies made and they needed people willing to work cheap, and it was a really fun way to get started in the movie business.
So you have this career. You started off. You made your first movie. This is I think you consider this to be like your second movie, roughly.
Yeah. There's another one in there that I don't talk about.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's a movie and my name's on it, but it's not great. And you know, and when I say not great, I mean it's unwatchable. But so I mean, my first real movie is Never on Tuesday.
Yep.
I would go so far as to say even my second real movie is The Dark Backward. So, but this one is my practice movie for The Dark Backward.
Right.
The previous movie to this is
something we just wouldn't want to talk about.
It's a little experiment. It's called A Tale of Two Sisters. It's just a little experimental movie. It exists. I can't pretend it's not out there, but it's not. I don't consider it a real movie by any stretch. We shot it in a weekend, and it was all improvised. It was just a little experiment, you know.
But what I'm getting at is you have this alias, Riff Coogan.
Yes.
And you have this idea that you're going to have like two parallel careers, or what? Like it's one thing to have one career. You want to have two.
Right. So here was the idea, right? Ill-conceived as it might have been. The idea was, because I love grindhouse movies. I always have, right? But I also aspired from the very beginning to be a filmmaker that was, you know, for lack of a better way to describe it, taken seriously and work with people who I admired and make movies that the people I admire would get to see. And, you know, so I wanted to make real movies. I wanted to make Hollywood movies. But at the same time, I didn't want to be snobby about the fact that about the existence of and my love of grindhouse movies. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I had a sort of a two-pronged career? What if I made real movies as my real job? And what if on the side, to continue to practice my craft and also to have fun, what if I made Riff Coogan movies. So I created the persona Riff Coogan for what was supposed to be a lot of these Grindhouse movies.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up only making 2.
Mm-hmm.
But because then I got busy with
real movies,
Yeah.
the ones that make money.
Right. But the Riff Coogan persona was this sort of cowboy guy, you know. So I even when this movie was finished and we had our premiere and when it was released, I appeared on a local television show. At the time, there was a famous DJ named The Poor Man. Mm-hmm. And he was the DJ on a station called KROQ, which was the cool rock channel at the time. And he had a local show about movies and music and stuff like that. And I knew him a little bit. And so I was on his show as Riff Coogan. Had a fake mustache on. It was silly. I think the footage exists and is probably, hopefully, available as a supplement on this disc.
Yes, we hope so.
Yeah. But the goal was that people might not ever know that Riff Coogan and Adam Rifkin were the same person. That was kind of the fun sort of fantasy. I will say this. Here's how I got the name Riff Coogan.
Yes.
Riff was my nickname as a kid because my last name's Rifkin. But Coogan is from my then favorite Clint Eastwood movie, Coogan's Bluff. That's how I came up with the name.
Yes, of all the Eastwood movies, Coogan's Bluff, that was your favorite.
That was my favorite at that time.
At that time,
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a huge Clint Eastwood fan, period, and I love so many of his movies. But at that moment in time, that was my favorite. I think because of the hippie thing, you know, and I kind of had a romance with hippie sort of 60s culture, so I think that was it. Even though his character was the square who comes to the hippie New York and, you know, chases down the bad hippies. You know?
Yes, exactly.
College with these grades.
What about my football scholarship?
Okay, so this is being a direct-to-video movie. You have no real idea of any sort of income coming in. You have no idea who's renting this movie in Iowa, Minnesota, California, New York, Mississippi, wherever. When did you start finding, or did you start discovering anybody who had seen this movie?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm always surprised when anybody ever has seen or likes any of my movies, right? So it's always a pleasant surprise.
You're selling yourself short.
But this movie, my first sort of shocked moment came when Paul Verhoeven had just directed The Hollow Man, which is a big, giant studio Invisible Man movie, right? Starring Kevin Bacon, right? And I thought it was a great movie, and the effects were amazing. But when he was doing the press tour for that movie, a bunch of the interviews I read that he gave, people would ask, did you research the history of Invisible Man movies? And he said consistently in several interviews that the only Invisible Man movie he watched was mine, which was really bizarre. And he talked about it a lot. And there was one interview where he and Kevin Bacon were in the same interview together, and Kevin Bacon was like, oh, I haven't heard of that one. He's like, oh, you really should watch it. It's very good. Go figure. It's completely insane, right? So that sort of left my mouth hanging agape. Then, years later, I had made a movie called Detroit Rock City, and we had used some Ramones songs in Detroit Rock City, and he was very thankful. He was appreciative. He was very nice, and he thanked me for using the songs because, you know, they get money for that.
Right. I'm sure he was very happy.
Yeah, and we were talking, and he said that he was a big, big fan of B movies, and one thing led to another, and The Invisible Maniac came up in the conversation. I think he even brought it up. And I said I directed that movie under my nom de plume, Riff Coogan, and Johnny Ramone geeked out over me because I had directed The Invisible Maniac. So that was shocking in all the right ways. So it was very, very bizarre. But also, too, this movie was one of those movies, for whatever reason, that played a lot on that show called USA Up All Night.
Yes, of course.
So a lot of people saw it then, and a lot of people also saw it when it played on late night, like Showtime, Cinemax, yeah, exactly. So this movie got a lot of play during that era. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, it turned out at that time, had seen it, which I later came to find out.
Yeah, well, it's funny, you know, when this job came up, I think I was confusing this movie with The Invisible Boy, which was sort of, maybe I have the name wrong, but our memories sort of just combine these movies, and it wasn't until much later that I realized that I had seen it maybe only, I don't know, really saw it only like maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I thought I had seen this movie, but it was something else.
Interesting. Well, this movie, people still have consistently been able to see it on bootleg.
Yes.
But nobody has ever been able to, because by the way, I'm myself excited to see the transfer of this because the last time I saw it look good was when I actually saw it at the premiere, when we screened it in 35 millimeter at the premiere. But the only way I've ever seen it since then is on VHS quality.
Really?
So it'll be nice to actually, because it was actually shot beautifully. And the DP, who has gone on to be a big DP, he's shot a lot of great stuff. And he did a really lovely job shooting it, but you'd never know it seeing it on VHS quality,
Right. So you had a premiere, so there was a 35 millimeter print, even though it was for a direct-to-video movie?
Yes, believe it or not, we had a big premiere, but caveat, we had the premiere at the Pussycat Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, which had just stopped showing porn movies. All right,
I see.
In our defense, okay?
Yes.
It had just stopped showing porn movies, and they were just starting to try and convert it into a mainstream theater. But it was packed somehow. I don't know how everybody knew about it to show up. It was a blast. I had footage of the premiere, which I can't find. I'm sorry. But it was a really wild and fun time. It was... Listen, we never, ever, when making this movie, ever thought it would show in front of an audience at all. Mm-hmm. So just the fact that we had a screening at this big theater in Hollywood was just a lot of fun.
You have a very confused little boy there, one that will eventually grow up.
And this actor here, his name, is it real?
Clement von Frankenstein, that is his real name. That is true.
I do like the way these are lit. So yeah, I think you're right. This will be fun to see some of the stuff in Ultra HD.
Absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah. That must have been Stephanie Blake, by the way, because I know that was sort of one of her tricks.
That was definitely Stephanie Blake.
Well, so you get a premiere, but this was not common for a direct-to-video movie. Who paid for it? Whose idea was it? I mean, to actually make a 35 millimeter print of this movie, because that also cost money.
Well, I will tell you this. At that time, as just sort of a part of delivery requirements, you had to deliver 35 millimeter prints. Like we had to deliver a 35 millimeter print of Psycho Cop 2 as well. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these movies would get theatrical releases in other countries. So even though it was never going to be seen in this country theatrically, it was just part of the contract that you had to deliver a 35 millimeter print.
And I assume they're showing those prints for foreign distributors in foreign markets as well?
Correct. And they're released in theaters in other markets around the world.
So this was released theatrically in Europe?
I don't know that for a fact, but I know that that's why these movies are
the way they are.
Why you have to deliver 35 millimeter elements.
I see. All right. Well, let's talk a second about this gentleman on our left here, Rod. This is where you first met him.
Yes, the great Rod Schweitzer,
yes.
who Tony Marks, as the casting director, found. And we fell in love with him immediately because he completely captured that square-jawed, sort of prep school, rugby team guy who we wanted, to the sort of all-American. He's got a kind of Russ Meyer archetype vibe about him,
Absolutely, he has that. Well, he like Dornwinkle, doesn't need a lot of setup. You just get exactly who he is.
You get exactly who he is, and that was the idea. And he's a great guy, and we obviously fell in love with him and used him in Psycho Cop Returns as well. And my plan was when I was going to make a ton of Riff Coogan movies, he was going to be in all of them. You know what I mean? So if we ever make any more Riff Coogan movies, Rod, is going to go back to work for me. But he totally captured that archetype, that trope of that guy, that alpha house, as opposed to the Omega House from Animal House guy, as opposed to the Delta House guys.
Yes, exactly. Well, we just saw too Savannah, and I think we need to at least discuss a little bit about her. She had a tragic ending. We don't have to get into all of that, but I think I remember first hearing about this movie through the True Hollywood Story.
Yeah, that's another way that this movie actually got some attention, not necessarily for the happiest reasons. I learned for the first time watching that True Hollywood Story at the premiere of this movie, at the premiere of The Invisible Maniac. And this is all described. There's a True Hollywood Story about Savannah and about her rise and tragic end. And I learned from her boyfriend from these days was interviewed, and he said that she was very upset at the premiere because people were laughing. She perceived that people were laughing at her. Mm-hmm. Now, I always felt, and I think most people would agree, that they're laughing because she's funny in the movie. They're not laughing at her. They're laughing with her. She's got that Marilyn Monroe sort of innate, whimsical, humorous quality about the way she delivers her lines. But apparently, she was very sad about the way she was perceived at the premiere, which breaks my heart because I thought she was great in the movie, and I think anyway. It's very, very sad because she ultimately she then became a huge porn star, but then she ultimately took her own life, which is very sad. I don't believe it had anything to do with this movie per se, but that's not a very that's I don't mean to bring the room down, but that's just a reality that is part of this movie's legacy.
Yeah, but I think it. Like I said, it brought a lot of attention to this movie because of the Hollywood Story.
It's true.
And because of this being her really only non-adult film role,
correct.
I believe, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I was shocked when she went into the adult film industry because when we filmed her first nude scene in the movie, she was very skittish about doing it. She was very self-conscious and shy, and she asked me if she could have a little alcohol before she shot it to sort of work up the nerve to do it. Mm-hmm. The punchline to that story is she drank too much and got sick and threw up on the set. She threw up all over the shower set, and we had to shoot it the next day when she was hungover, which was not fun for her. But so anyway, so then for her to have gone from being very, very shy about doing a nude scene to being the biggest porn star in the world, it was a bit of a surprise. But hey, listen, to become the biggest porn star in the world takes a certain level of je ne sais quoi. So,
yes.
More power to her.
Yes. Well, and she must have been like 18 or 19 when she made this movie because she had a very short career making those adult films after this.
Correct.
Before she passed away.
Young. Yeah, she was very young.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she really is, of the actresses, and I'm not putting any of the other ones down, she really is the one that your eyes gravitate towards. She does have that certain...
She has that it quality. She has that star quality that so few people have, and that's why it's not surprising that she became so successful in the other... in the other line of in the other Hollywood movies,
Yes, exactly. And this is where the movie really turns, right? It becomes this, I guess you would just call it a slasher movie. It becomes the Maniac of Invisible Maniac, but it's kind of light on the gore. Was that a conscious decision?
No, it was not a conscious decision. We did not purposely want to shy away from gore. I love gore. One of the things that when I was a kid that I loved was reading Fangoria magazine and Gorezone magazine and learning how guys like Tom Savini and Rick Baker and all the maestros would create this really cool gore. So yeah, no, it definitely wasn't something we wanted to shy away from. It just was not. We couldn't really afford to create a lot of gore. Mm-hmm. We used for example, at the end of the movie, you'll see when one of the actors gets their head blown off.
Yes.
That's a body that Tony Gardner already had. Tony Gardner, our effects makeup artist on the movie, who also did the third arm for The Dark Backward. But, everything we used, we pretty much did it obviously the cheapest way possible. So we couldn't really create, like when he jumps on, I think it's Bunny's head. You know, in the script, her head exploded, you know, but we couldn't really afford that, so we just kind of had the aftermath of him walking away with blood on his shoes, you know?
Yep.
I think it works fine, but I would have been fine with more gore, too, you know?
Well, I guess that was my question. Was it budgetary or was it choice?
It was budgetary. Mm-hmm. I mean, this scene has has some legendary gore in it, where the sandwich is shoved down his throat and it inflates his throat. This scene has been discussed and debated in film schools across the world for decades.
Yeah, friendship bracelets. Boy, you don't see those anymore. Man, this really dates it. How do these actors, you know, you've got Noel doing, I think, a lot of the voiceover in post, right? Where he's saying all these lines to what he's doing to these people. Right. But was it hard for these actors to act like they were being attacked by an invisible maniac? Well, I mean, it must feel silly.
Here's what's funny about that very question, okay? So one of the reasons we wanted to make an Invisible Man movie was because we thought it would be so much cheaper because you just needed sound effects. So we would do fight scenes. We didn't have to choreograph any fight scenes, because people just pretended they were getting punched in the face, and we would put a sound effect in, and we thought it was funny, but B, it was cheap, you know? We didn't have to, we could just tip over a bookcase, and suddenly the Invisible Man did it, you know?
Yes.
So that was definitely a cost consideration when we just came up with the idea from the start.
See you next fall!
That was done with a fishing wire, which, as you know, is very inexpensive.
And there's some screen misdirection here. It's coming from one way, but it enters from the ghost. It's entering from a different direction.
Well, the crossing of the line is something I
this was your practice run.
I learned on this movie, yeah. So I had to do a little bit of trial and error to get that right.
So what exactly? When you talk about practicing, this being one of them. What were some other the lessons that you learned?
Shooting fast, knowing that you had what you needed and being able to move on. That was a big lesson.
And did you have video assist while you were watching this at all?
I don't think we had video assist on this movie, if I'm remembering.
Okay.
I don't believe we did. I could be wrong. I don't remember that we had it. I will tell you this though. You asked, do people feel silly in this movie, pretending to fight with invisible people? Yes. Everybody felt silly. Everybody felt stupid. But everybody was game, which is admirable. Mm-hmm. Because it is silly and stupid, I mean, Kylie, who's here on the left, she has to dunk her own head in a fish tank and pretend that she's being drowned by an invisible maniac. I mean, that took a lot of guts.
Yeah, and there's some other interesting direction that happens in this scene. We'll talk about when it happens, but is this all taking place basically in one day? I mean, I guess there's one other day because there's a night scene with.
There's a few days, yeah, because he goes back and like the tests on the rabbit, and he goes back to school, and he goes back and tests on himself, and yeah, I think it's a few days. But by the way, one of the reasons why this is set at summer school instead of normal school is because we couldn't afford any extras.
Right.
So we thought, all right, how do we make the school not look empty by mistake?
It's going to be empty, so yes, exactly.
So we just had a sign at the beginning of the movie that said, summer school starts today, or whatever the sign said, I don't remember. So then...
And there's only one class.
There's only one summer school class, right.
Thank God you're here.
What's the matter, girls? You look like you've seen a ghost.
It's worse. It's much worse.
Now just calm
He really holds the movie together, I have to say. I've now rewatched this multiple times. He's fantastic.
He is fantastic.
It was wrapped around her neck.
And we don't know his real name.
No, Noel Peters is not his real name. I personally do not remember his real name. I mean, this was 33 years ago. I think we should ask Tony Marks if he remembers his name, because he was the casting director. He might remember his real name.
And he doesn't look familiar to me like I've seen him in other things, too. It's like sometimes you can piece together these things.
Sure.
But I've never seen him before.
Now Now just stay calm.
And I wonder too. He's like, were people bringing their own wardrobe for this movie, or did you actually have wardrobe?
We had a wardrobe person, but I think it's one of those movies where, okay, everybody bring a few changes of clothes, and we'll figure out which ones you wear for which scenes. You know? The lab coats we had to get, and the, for the scientists and stuff.
What were some of the biggest costs beside film?
The biggest costs, the location rental was a big cost, but we were there for the whole movie, so that was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
The sign at the beginning that said, the asylum for the criminally insane, that was a professionally made sign. That cost money on a little tiny movie like this, But for the most part, everything was pretty damn cheap. I'll tell you this, Matt Devlin found us some fantastic caterers. They were super cheap, but they were amazing. I still remember, 33 years later, the lunches on this movie. So that should tell you something.
Well, what were they?
Well, they were, first of all, Matt was vegetarian at that time, and I was just recently vegetarian at that time. So a lot of it was vegetarian. It was really good. And but I don't remember what the items were. I just remember it was really good. So, by the way, here's a perfect example of cost-effective special effects.
Yes.
People standing behind the camera throwing books
Yes.
at the cast. That's a little trick I learned watching Gremlins.
Of course.
That is a very effective bit in Gremlins, and so I thought, oh, that'll work here too.
Well, and this is very interesting here. I can't quite understand how April is being pinned down to the wall there, while the other actress is being forced into the fish.
I can explain that to you.
Okay.
Actually. She was thrown down at first, and then he switched his attention
Yes.
to Kaylee.
Yes.
Kaylee. But the door's locked, so she's frozen there in fear. And once he kills her, then he goes back and kills Gail.
But why doesn't she get up and attack the Invisible Maniac? She she doesn't have to cry for help. She can go over there and do something.
She's petrified. She's petrified, with fear.
She could save her friend here.
By the way, again, these fish were not harmed during this movie. Again, very important to me as an animal lover. Now, I can't promise that they weren't a little scared that a giant face
or an invisible man.
But we did not. Yes, but we did not hurt any fish.
Good. Interesting too. Your editor on this picture,
Ron Resnick.
Ron Resnick, not a pseudonym. That's his real name.
That's his name.
But during this sequence, we have these interesting cutaways to these skeletons. I don't know if you noticed that, but
oh yeah.
But was that due to a lack of coverage?
No, that was a motif, which was medical shit.
Right.
That was our, science, biology. That we were trying to create we were trying to elicit a mood.
Okay.
Of science, biology, medicine, because the invisible serum is coursing through his veins.
Got it.
So that's why we did all this stuff.
Okay,
Now I will tell you that it doesn't necessarily work, but we weren't overly concerned with that at the time.
But obviously that was a conscious choice.
It was a conscious choice.
While
Yes.
you were doing it, making sure you got all those loving shots of the brains and the veins and the skeletons.
That was
so that was always
intentional.
planned.
Yeah, that was intentional.
All right.
I will tell you at the premiere, this Herc punching the invisible face got a big laugh at the premiere. Yeah, now that I look at it, it's weird that we keep cutting back to the medical poster over and over again.
Yeah, I know. It is strange.
Go figure. I don't know what we were thinking. I'll tell you this about the editing room. Right next door, the editing room was the editing room for a movie called Daddy's Dying, Who's
Got the Will?
Who's Got the Will, directed by Jack Fisk, the great Jack Fisk, who had previously been, and then subsequently later again was, David Lynch's production designer.
Sure.
And also is production designer for Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah.
And for Terrence Malick.
Yes.
Anyway, I got to know him a little bit during this time because our cutting rooms were next door to one another, and he was a great guy. And it's just one of those situations where this movie opened up that door where I got to meet that guy. And it was such a rare, unusual opportunity. And he was so supportive of us making this little, crappy movie. But he couldn't have been cooler. And I would go in and see scenes that they were cutting. He would show me. We'd show him scenes that we were cutting. Didn't have the same. It wasn't a balance. It wasn't balanced, but it was great. It was great.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
And here we have.
So here we have Savannah in her death scene.
This was not when she was she hung over in this one, or
this
the other
is the scene where she was hung over.
Okay.
She looks great though. You'd never know she was hung over. I cast her in The Dark Backward as well.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I needed there's a scene where Bill Paxton finds a nude corpse at the dump.
Yes.
And the idea is you think, when you're watching the movie, that he uncovers this corpse and that the corpse is going to have something to do with the plot.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, he just sexually molests the corpse and then covers it back up, and then we never mention it again. That's the joke, right? So Shannon said she would do it, right? So we cast her to be the corpse. So we're shooting down in the trenches of the dump, which is just mountains of trash everywhere, and she's way up at base camp getting body makeup put on. We get the word over the walkie.
So she was there.
She was there. She showed up. She was happy to be there. We get the word over the walkie. Shannon's here. We're putting her in makeup, and so a couple hours later, I'm asked to go up to the trailer and approve the body makeup. Right. So I go up to the makeup trailer, and she's wearing a bathrobe. She takes the bathrobe off. The makeup is fabulous. I mean, just like, corpse makeup. But unexpectedly, she had, just prior to showing up, gotten very large breast implants.
Yes.
But no shame in that. But it's very different than what I wanted for the scene. Because I wanted the scene to have what seemed like a very young girl who's dead in the garbage. I thought that would seem more tragic. I didn't want it to look like somebody who was
a voluptuous stripper. Yeah,
I didn't want it to feel that way. I wanted it to feel like it was somebody who was maybe nabbed off a schoolyard or something. So I said to her, "It looks great. Makeup's great. Thank you so much. Great." And then I left the makeup trailer, and I went to the first AD, and I said, "What happened?" I said, "We can't really use her, unfortunately. So tell her that we're just cutting the whole scene," because I didn't want her to feel self-conscious that we were just not using her.
Mm-hmm.
So she felt fine. She got paid. She was totally cool. And then we asked the crew, is there anybody on the crew who'd be willing to do it? And there was a crew member who agreed to do it for an amount of money. So
yes.
And it worked out fine.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I never knew that. And I will say, getting back to actors acting with an Invisible Man, Rod is by far the best.
He is absolutely the best at acting with an Invisible Man, and I wish there were more Invisible Man movies that he could have been in, because he just had a knack for it.
And this is the song here that we're listening to as well.
There's a story behind that.
Yes, tell me about that.
So my friend, who I know from USC, we were cartoonists together at the USC newspaper, is named Dan Povenmire.
Yes.
Dan Povenmire, as I know you know, has gone on to become one of the most successful creators of Disney television.
Mm-hmm.
He created Phineas and Ferb, which was a multi-billion-dollar franchise for Disney. He had another show called Milo Murphy's Law, which was a big hit, and he's currently doing a new Disney show called Hamster and Gretel. But at this time, he was, starting out, as we all were, and he also had a band. So I needed a song for the movie, and so he wrote a fantastic song, wrote and performed it, which is this song that you heard, and it's also repeated at the end of the movie.
Credits, yeah. Well, too, we were talking over, but Rod doesn't do the full stunt, does he?
No, he doesn't jump off the actual roof. The stuntman who you saw in the scientist scene is the one who actually jumped off the actual roof.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we cut to the car and Rod,
it's the slow motion shot.
Slow motion comes in from above frame and hits the roof of the car.
That's him.
That is Rob.
Yeah.
And that is a stunt.
And that looks painful.
It was painful. And he did it. And that's my, was that my car? No, that was That was Matt Devlin's car. I haven't wrecked my car for other movies, but I think that was Matt Devlin's car. We smashed the roof in of Matt Devlin's car.
And here, your quota, you talk about quota. It's like, how often is there nudity in this picture? I guess I never sat there with a clock watch. But, there used to be, Roger Corman used to say, something has to happen in every reel, i.e. like every 20 minutes. I mean, this movie feels pretty full in terms of that TNA quota, I guess.
That was the idea.
Mm-hmm.
We figured, like I was saying earlier, we figured if we're going to do an exploitation movie, let's make it as exploitive as we can. But again, everybody there was game. Everybody there was there for what was required. So
no secrets.
No
secrets when they got to the set.
Everybody was a very willing participant.
And this too, it's like, there was a period where you could show sex, but you couldn't show sex. You had to do these very weird slow-mo montage sequences of people doing kissing and groping, of touching things, where it's like you couldn't actually show any kind of like thrusting.
I don't remember us having any restrictions like that on this movie, but I also on this movie, I wrote the original script in like 2 days, and again we shot it in like a week, and so the idea was to just hit every low-hanging fruit and just load it with as many familiar tropes as possible.
And also stretch it out a little. I mean, let's be honest, right?
Without question. That is absolutely true. So to do this love-making montage and to just milk it like that, just the slow-motion shots of kissing shoulders and elbows and stuff, that we knew when we were doing it how corny it was, but that was just all part of the shtick,
Now, which led me to the next question I had was, did you have to get this movie rated?
Yes, it had to be an R rating.
So tell us about that, because that was something that was also important for the direct-to-video market as well, and it was a big cost.
It was a cost, but it was all part of the budget, and every movie you had to work that into the budget. And also, too, we did not have the money to go back and re-edit. So I knew what we were delivering was going to get an R, and it did get an R.
Okay.
Unlike the situation with Psycho Cop Returns, where there was a lot more gore and we got dinged by the MPAA, and so then for the home video market, that movie got hacked to ribbons, and the uncut version hadn't been seen at least in America until Vinegar Syndrome put out the Blu-ray.
Right, that's right. Yeah, so I guess that I wanted to know if you were trying to be conscious of that R rating, but
without a doubt, yeah.
Okay, all right.
But I will say for Psycho Cop Returns, we thought we were going to be able to deliver an R. Whoever hacked out all the gore did it with a fucking
pair of
chainsaw.
scissors.
Yeah, we could have trimmed it a little bit and got the rating, but whoever did it just cut everything out that could possibly be an issue, and it just was as a result a hatchet job.
Yeah, and because you'll be charged if you go back, if you cut it, and you get charged every time that it goes through like an arbitration to like see if it passes.
Well, here's the problem. In those days, you had to finish it on film, like we were talking about, and so you had to screen the finished version for the MPAA, which, when you think about it, is cruel of the MPAA to demand a finished version, because it costs small movies a lot of money to go back and change things.
But you required, their seal of approval, and you required that for the market.
Absolutely.
And it was,
you couldn't. For example, if this movie had gotten, if this movie was unrated or
NC-17 or
NC-17
something.
didn't quite exist yet, but
close enough.
Blockbuster wouldn't have carried it, and that was the biggest market.
So, did you have any idea of how many units were being sold to the video stores? I mean, was it successful for Cassian?
Well, I'll tell you this. I don't know how many units it actually sold, but I'll tell you how successful it was for Cassian. Cassian spent probably in the neighborhood of $150,000, $200,000 making the movie. And if I'm not mistaken, he sold it to Republic Pictures, just the initial sale, for $750,000.
Wow.
So that's the industry as it existed then. That's why everybody who could was cranking out exploitation movies. Because,
And does Mort get some of that money back, by the way, or all of it?
Oh, he got most of that back. Yeah. Mert
Mert,
Shapiro,
sorry.
yeah. Oh, I always thought his way he ran was funny. But yes, so that's why there's such a glut of content because there's gold in them there hills. Everybody and their uncle wanted to just crank out something that was 90 minutes long with boobs and some blood and in color because they knew they could make a fortune no matter what. And in most instances, that was the case.
Yeah, and that was a big market, that's for sure. Yeah, Noel's laugh. He has a great laugh.
Yes. The reason we loved his laugh is because he brought that when he auditioned for The Dark
I
Backward.
see. All of this just must have felt extremely silly for the actors.
How could it not? We all thought it was silly.
And so how much of a change, or was there much of a change from your original draft to what was actually rewritten for this movie? Do you know? Was there stuff that you couldn't do? It
wasn't that big of a difference. I mean, I think, the original draft might not have been long enough. I mean, maybe it was just expanded a little bit here and there. Whatever their contributions were to the rewrite were fine. It made it more production friendly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what details they added or took away, but
I mean, watching this movie in a noisy bar with no sound must be really confusing.
That's right. I can imagine.
I mean, it just looks like he's having an epileptic fit. And were the actors like flubbing their lines because they were laughing ever? I mean, were they?
I don't remember us breaking down and laughing in the middle of takes and ruining takes. It wasn't that kind of vibe.
Okay.
But we all just sort of, everybody was just in on the joke. That's the difference. Everybody, it's not like anybody felt, it's not like some people thought we were making one movie and we thought we were making another movie. Everybody was in on it, which made it more fun.
And you mentioned earlier how your mom and one of your grandparents was in the movie. Did they come to the premiere, and did they
Both
know
of my grandparents. No, they did not come to the premiere.
No.
No.
So
but
did
I will
they
tell
know?
you this: my grandmother saw the movie. I sent them a video cassette. My grandparents in Chicago, and my grandmother, my mother relayed this to me. My grandmother watched it, and my grandmother, was she's no longer with us. Was very skittish about swearing and nudity and everything. And she said, well, I could have done without the language and some of the other stuff, but it was cute. I thought it was cute.
All right, so you got Grandma's seal of approval.
Grams was okay with it.
All right, and your mom too. I mean, she wasn't at the premiere, but she saw the movie.
Oh yeah, my mom totally was in on it. My mom was very, very open-minded mom.
Mm-hmm. She was very supportive of what we were doing.
Everybody in my family was very supportive throughout my whole life, luckily.
Mm-hmm.
I've never felt stronger. But it's time to move on. Too many nubile young students who haven't had a chance to meet the irresistible Dr.
Well, you mentioned too, I wanted to ask you, Valerie in that scientist's scene. It's like, she made a movie.
Well, Valerie's gone on to become a very successful filmmaker. She was an actor in those days, but she wrote and directed Love and Sex, which is based on her and my relationship.
That's what I was just going to ask
John
you.
Favreau plays me, Famke Jensen plays her. But she's made other movies. She's also working with Dan Povenmire on this current Disney show now as one of the writers. Yeah, so she's always working, always busy, doing cool stuff.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes, don't believe everything you read in the newspapers. How prescient, right?
That's right. So now, one of the things we thought was going to be funny was this big battle that they have where two invisible people are fighting one another. So it was just a lot of shaky camera moves and throwing shit into the frame and sound effects.
Yep.
We just thought it was so stupid that it would be funny.
Yes. Well, I got to say, too, it's like, it's interesting that, when you think of The Hollow Man, which is just like, the first real, that was the first commercial pervy Invisible Man movie.
Thanks to Paul Verhoeven, of course.
Yes, but this is, it took so long to get a real pervy Invisible Man movie, and you did it. I mean, because
Well,
really, that's,
I accept that as a compliment.
but that's part of kind of going back to the Mad Magazine, Zap Comics sort of
Totally,
idea.
National Lampoon magazine,
Yes,
absolutely. All
of
that stuff was those are all my influences.
That's like the ultimate desire, really, is to just be invisible and to be able to go into a girl's dorm and watch them shower, right?
Of course. It's of course never mentioned why their clothes turn invisible. We didn't care about the logic there. So as you can see, I mean, this is just two invisible people fighting. Stupid. Now, when you see the rabbit cage thrown into the shot, I just want to make it clear that is not really the rabbit in the cage.
Come on! Get over here! Get over! Come on! Fight me! Where are you? Come on! Where are you? Fight me!
Which is coming up any moment now. That was the sound man's fuzzy cut. There
Oh,
it
right
is.
there, right
That's
there.
not really the rabbit in there.
Yes.
The sound man's fuzzy microphone
Oh,
cover.
his the windbreaker for
Yes,
the microphone.
that's what that was. Rolled up in a ball. Now this is Tony Marks and Matt Devlin. Matt on the left, Tony on the right.
Yep.
The two producers of the movie.
Now, did Tony Gardner make that that body for this movie, or
No,
was
that
it
was
something else?
Something from another movie. Yeah.
All right.
Everything was pretty much repurposed.
Paid off. Sure did. Dornwinkle, you bastard. Why didn't you think of doing this before you killed all those kids? I would make some...
Now the two of them went dressed like cops to the Cannes Film Festival with an invisible doll, you know, like handcuffed, as part of a sales thing for the foreign salespeople on this movie to help promote it at the Cannes Film Festival.
So they had these invisible handcuffs, like they
Yeah, they had handcuffs on, like and sunglasses, and it was a whole thing rigged up to look like an invisible person was handcuffed.
Okay.
They were there in Cannes to help promote the movie on the Croisette.
Oh man, we got robbed of a sequel, didn't we?
Sadly. But
Now,
the laughing is great.
Was this Was this his apartment? Was it in the school? As well?
Everything was in the school, yeah. Everything we shot was in that one location, which made the shoot very, very easy.
And now you made a choice to shoot a monitor?
Yes. Now, usually in those days, when you shoot a television, there was a device you could attach to the television to
match the frame rate.
match the frame rate so that you wouldn't get this flicker. We
Yes.
couldn't afford that, of course. So we just decided we didn't care.
But why not just shoot it on film?
Because we wanted it to look like it was
A television.
on television.
All right. Okay. Well, here we are at the end. Adam, I want to thank you. And there's a couple of interesting credits in these end credits that I wanted to point out and ask you about.
Of course.
We're getting up on them fairly soon. There's some very ridiculous invisible experts. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, Miles Dougal, the third, yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Miles, Miles up there. I think it's coming up here pretty soon. Oh, there's your craft supervisor, Big Bob K.
They were delicious. I don't know if they're still in business, but if they are, guys, your apple crumble was. I'm thinking about it 33 years later.
Highest paid member on the set. Was that really Wayne and the fire marshal?
Oh yes, absolutely
Okay.
true.
Yeah, the fire marshal, Wayne. Oh gosh. Negative cutter is not an editor with a bad attitude. That's actually a job, right? Yeah, here we are. So you got your invisible research, Peter Berg.
So Peter Berg, before he was
Yes.
the biggest director in Hollywood, he was in my first movie, Never
Yes.
on Tuesday. Just a good friend of mine. Gave him that credit. Steve Bing
Yes.
is the person who I was telling you about, who watched the movie with me at the lab, who said that he thought it was so funny that Noel gave such a committed performance. But he's also ended up producing tons of big movies.
And you did.
He produced some movies of mine, but he
Yes.
produced Polar Express. He produced Beowulf. He produced Scorsese movies, Albert Brooks movies. He's no longer with us,
Yes,
sadly,
yes,
but
I know.
but he was a very great guy.
Yeah. Well, here we are at the end. I guess we don't have to sit here and talk about everybody's names here, but I just wanted to say thank you for coming, making this movie,
Thank
and any
you.
final comments.
Well, I will just say that for all the people throughout all these years who have enjoyed this movie, appreciated this movie, asked me many times over, will this movie ever find its way to Blu-ray? I'm just delighted that it's now being released in a high-quality version and that I get a chance to talk about these fun times. And I really just appreciate you and Vinegar Syndrome and everybody who's put so much effort into making this Blu-ray a fabulous Blu-ray, packing it with great extras, making sure that the movie is of the highest quality. It just really... The last thing we ever thought about when we were making this movie was that this is one of the ones that would be being remembered, restored, and having a beautiful Blu-ray release. Of course, Blu-ray didn't exist, but you know what I mean.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.